Do you want to start it? There's people in the waiting room. Or wait until 6.
And there are 20 people now.
17 people.
You all can see the script, right? Okay.
Yep.
I'm starting the webinar now.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Yan, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We'll be starting in 5 minutes, and thank you for your patience. Please take a moment to let us know your grade level by typing it in the chat so we can tailor our session accordingly. Thank you. All right, thank you for everyone's patience. Now, firstly, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Yan, currently a rising junior at Monte Vista High School, and I'm honored to be hosting today's seminar. Thank you all for joining us for this special event featuring Dr. Wei. Now, before we dive into Dr. Wei's insights, let's take a moment to familiarize those who may be new to 7EDU. 7EDU specializes in educational consulting and are proud members of two prominent admission consulting associations in the United States, NACAC and WACAC. Additionally, they are certified by the College Board to provide AP courses and serve as a test center for various competitions. Today, we are privileged to have Dr. Wei join us. Dr. Wei holds an MD from Yale School of Medicine and a bachelor's in Science, Technology, and Society from Stanford University, with a minor in human biology. Currently, Dr. Wei excels as a resident physician in the internal medicine dermatology program at Georgetown University Hospital. Beyond his clinical expertise, Dr. Wei is a dedicated mentor, leveraging his experience, including serving on the selection committee for Yale School of Medicine, to guide aspiring medical professionals. His students' achievements are a testament to his impactful mentorship with successful admissions to prestigious medical schools, such as Yale, Harvard, Northwestern, and NYU. Now, during today's seminar, Dr. Wei will address key topics relevant to students considering medical school, including GPA/MCAT benchmark requirements, a comprehensive pre-med guide tailored for students, and an insightful analysis of a successful Harvard Medical School application essay. They assure you that our content is both informative and valuable. Therefore, we encourage you to invite friends and family to join us today. Now that we have outlined today's agenda, please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat. We will conduct an in-depth Q&A session following Dr. Wei's presentation. Now, Dr. Wei, thank you for joining us today. Our first question for you is, how do we know if a student is suitable to go to medical school?
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Sarah. Thank you all for having me. Let's see. So the first question, is one that is one of a lot of self-reflection, and I feel like everybody in their journey towards medical school really has to think very hard about this kind of thing. Personally for me, I didn't decide I wanted to go to medical school until probably later high school. Some people do know from the very beginning that they wanted to be a doctor, and that's totally okay. And it's totally okay if you find out during your undergrad. Regardless of your motivation, something that I always talk about with my students is to be really honest to yourself and reflect on some of the questions that are on the screen and also some others. Obviously, are you competitive for medical school? In high school, you can kind of get a sense for, how strong you are with your biology and chemistry. If you're not doing so great on those classes, it's going to be an uphill battle. If you're doing wonderful in those classes, that's great. For our undergrads in the audience, those of you who are interested in pre-med probably know, the kind of GPA and MCAT and all the things that you have to do. Obviously, med school is a pretty intense ball game. The application process is, I would say, more difficult than it is for undergrads. And you just have to know if you're competitive and really be honest with yourself. The other thing is medical training is really long. There's really no getting around it. People have different priorities in life, right? Some people are okay with, spending an extra 4 years of school, which you have to pay for. And the loans for grad school are a bit worse than the loans for undergrad. And then not only do you have to go through that 4-year period, but there's also the anywhere between 3 and 7 years of post-MD training that is required to be a medical doctor. That's residency, which is what I'm going through right now. And really, compared to some other fields that people might be familiar with, there's a lot of delayed gratification. A lot of the reward in a medical career comes kind of later into your 30s and 40s rather than earlier in your 20s. And for some people, that's totally fine. And for some people, that's kind of too much. And that's entirely dependent on you and what you want out of your life. And then as far as you got to think about how you're going to balance medical school with your personal life. Are you going to want to start a family during those years? Are you going to want to Travel, how are you going to be able to cope with the stresses of med school? And I have students from all different backgrounds, and they kind of have thought through this, differently, and it's a really personal conversation that you really need to have yourself. And part of what I like to do with my students is really, really push them to think about these things, because it's okay if you come to me saying that, I want to do medical school and ultimately decide that, you don't want to. It's better to decide before you find yourself in, with four-year post-grad degree that you really never wanted. So you got to think about these things early. You can always change your mind, but if you're going to get yourself into it, you got to know what you're getting yourself into.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that. Now, after understanding the suitability for students for medical school, you also did mention the GPA and MCAT. So what exactly is the benchmark looking like for med school students for the GPA and the MCAT?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, you have to think the bar for getting into any medical school, I would say, is about similar to getting into at least a top 50 like US undergrad program, at minimum. Like getting into a medical school is as much of an achievement as getting into some of the top universities for an undergrad program. So it's just a different ballgame. It's really like much more selective. As much as I, don't like to even when I was on the selection committee for Yale, it's not kind of bad to boil everyone down to their MCAT score and GPA, but really because of how many applications schools get and how few spots that we have open. For reference, Yale is one of the smaller schools as far as the number of students, and so there's about 100 spots, and they probably get around 8,000 to 9,000 applications. So that's the kind of level you're dealing with. Obviously, not every medical school is quite that selective, but you gotta stay on top of your GPA, because it may sound like crazy to be like, oh, you have to have at least a 3.5 GPA in undergrad, but really like having a low GPA kind of is a pretty it puts a damper on your application, let's put it that way. And then also having an above average MCAT score. So about a 3.5 or 511 is typical for any med school. If you want to get into the top tier med schools, then you're looking more like as close to 4 as possible, and as close to 528 as possible, to some degree. So I would say anything above like a 525 on the MCAT is really like there's no functional difference between a 525, 526, 527 to 528. And GPA wise, 3.9 is not going to be that much different than a 4, but you get the idea.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that question. Now, after we do understand the GPA and MCAT requirements, we have an analysis for the Harvard Successful Medical Application essay I talked about earlier. So could you give us a little annotation on the specific stuff that we might have to go through?
Sure. We can do that first. Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to go through all the nitty-gritty for all of this, but I will try to annotate a little bit. Let me see if I can get the annotation tool. That's okay. Regardless, so the main thing about writing your med school application essay, and I don't know how many of you are actually in the process of applying to either undergrads or medical schools. Ultimately, the advice is pretty similar. Med school essays tend to be a little bit more focused than the personal statement you might send to a undergrad. And the main thing is you got to be really, really clear. And one thing I really like about this essay is that in the first paragraph, it sets up basically everything that it's going to talk about. So it's talking about this person's experience with Alzheimer's disease, their interest in neuroscience, and their motivation to be a doctor. And those are, especially just leading up to your motivation for being a physician is kind of the most important part. It should be the center of your essay. if you go through your entire essay, you know, talking about your achievements and never really get to, you know, why do you want to be a doctor in the first place, that's not a useful essay, right? And so every paragraph in this, basically, the way that the author has laid this out is it's pretty chronological, but every paragraph focuses on like one major thing that they did, some achievement that they had or activity that they had, and how that contributed to their journey towards medicine, right? Because this person doesn't say that, you know, I wanted to be a doctor from the day I was born. So they start off, you know, talking about how their interest in music, and how that led to an interest in how the brain works, and from there, what eventually led to their major at Harvard. And then from there, you know, they talk about an anecdote in which they were able to connect, you know, not necessarily in a medical perspective, but as a person with somebody with Alzheimer's dementia. And that's one of the important things that differentiates a medical application essay from like a regular undergrad, is that you basically always have to have some kind of anecdote, like some kind of patient, person, you know, somebody that you worked with that really shows, you know, you understand the science. Everybody who applies to medical school, you know, is like, you know, a sciencey person, right? That's not unique. But you gotta show how you connect with the people, because your humanist side is really what makes the difference between you being a wonderful researcher and you being a physician, right? Because ultimately you're using science to take care of people. It's not just about the science itself. So this person talks about their experience with somebody suffering from Alzheimer's dementia, and how that led them more towards the humanist side of medicine. And over the next couple paragraphs, they talk a little bit more about, you know, what they did in research, and how they kind of developed their intellectual curiosity. And if we can go to the next slide. And basically how they kind of explored their interest in medicine, and went from, you know, seeing all different kinds of medicine, and how do they what kind of things they found interesting about psychiatry specifically. And you don't have to have your specific interest, but it's nice to have something that you're interested in, right? You may not know what specialty you want to go into when you apply to medical school. I know I didn't. But if you have some kind of interest, something that you're passionate about, you got to show that. And then wrap everything up, basically remind the reader, because they're spending about as much time as I'm doing right now, reading through your essay. Just like at the end, you got to wrap up and like remind them the main points of your journey towards medicine. And I think this is really nice, because you get to see, you know, kind of how their interest evolved over time. You know, they're not just they are, you know, showing off a lot of their like the proudest accomplishments, the things that they've done, but they're not only doing that. They're not listing their resume, but they're really showing how these experiences led them to the point where they are today applying to medical school, right? And you got to have that kind of narrative. You got to have a story. That makes it way easier to read these. When you're on the application, the admissions committee, you're reading a ton of these, and they get really boring, because everyone says the same stuff. And if you have, you know, a clear laid out structure, at least the friction of me reading it doesn't, you know, annoy me, right? And it is kind of, you know, to be frank, it kind of sucks that that these decisions are being made kind of based off of a person's feeling to them. But, you know, I try to be pretty unbiased when I read them. I'm sure there are many, especially older faculty, who are much less forgiving when it comes to, you know, I feel, you know, I just don't feel right about this essay. And you never want that, right? So being clear, having a good story, and like not just listing the stuff that you did, but really tying everything together is what I would recommend.
Thank you. So that now we know a little bit more about the essay process. So we do want to go back and talk a little bit more about the guide for high school students specifically on how to really prepare for pre-med and medical school and what they can do to prepare not only academically but extracurriculars and some summer programs or internships that are available.
Yeah, so I've worked with a couple high school students who are interested in medical school. And some of them are even interested in what are called the BS-MD combined programs, and that's basically where you apply into a program where the med school is basically like your admission to med school is already guaranteed. You know, obviously you have to meet certain requirements and whatever during your undergrad career, but so I have worked with some folks who are interested in those as well. The main thing is you know, if you're not applying to a BSMD, the main thing is, you know, a couple things actually. First off, you've got to challenge yourself academically as far as science goes. You know, you want to have a really strong foundation in, especially in like biology and chemistry and physics, calculus, things that you don't necessarily think may be the most relevant to medicine, but unfortunately, you know, undergrad really is a weeding out process for pre-meds. You know, some places are much worse than others, but ultimately it's a filter, right? And the main thing is you don't want to go into, you know, your first year in undergrad and having taken like no like advanced level chemistry class because you're in for a rough time, right? I did AP chemistry, I did AP biology, and even then, like the Gen Chem at Stanford was significantly harder because we were covering material much quicker than you do in high school. Like you spend a whole year just on AP chemistry, whereas like that's like AP chemistry is like maybe half of first year Gen Chem. And the way we did it, we were a quarter system, and so that's 10 weeks, right? Basically, AP chemistry plus a little bit, taught probably not as well in 10 weeks, right? You don't want that to be your first rodeo. Basically the same for all the other science and math stuff. And then those classes are ultimately going to be what they test you on in the MCAT. And so it's just kind of good to build that foundation while you're a high school student. The other thing that's not on here is from a purely like strategic standpoint as far as applications go. I know like it's kind of like taboo to say that, you know, like prestige matters and like, you know, the like the school name, you know, but it really opens doors for you. So when you're applying to medical school, a lot of medical schools look at least the people on the committees will use the reputation of your undergrad as like kind of a like a quick and easy like heuristic for, you know, how rigorous was your undergrad education. It's entirely not fair. And it's entirely like it's not right, but it does happen, right? So, you know, if you can get into the best, you know, most prestigious school for undergrad, that really lines you up better for getting into a good medical school. Because, you know, people have these internalized biases based on what they've heard. A lot of the faculty themselves came from, you know, upper tier undergrads and medical schools, so that like any name that they recognize they're going to be more comfortable with, right?
Yeah, so after we understand what we want to do to prepare for in terms of academically, we want to look a little bit more into the extracurriculars a pre-med student or a medical student would want to have on their resume and what they would want to write about.
Yeah, so this is a more challenging part for high schoolers just because of age restrictions. So I'll talk about undergrads first. So undergrads, you know, kind of because you're, you know, typically over 18, the world is your oyster, right? Usually a lot of undergrads have associated medical schools. They have a lot of volunteer opportunities. You can volunteer with their hospital, clinics, some places will have free clinics. The med students will kind of run, and then they'll be looking for undergrad volunteers to kind of help out, and that's something I did a lot of during my undergrad. You can also in the community for things. Once you're over 18, things become a lot easier as far as, the like medical legal side of like volunteering. And really when you're a undergrad student, you should really be exposing yourself to clinical hours, right? One of the things that they're going to be looking for is how much time have you spent in the clinic being exposed to patients in a medical setting, right? As a high schooler, things are a little bit trickier. So that's where kind of it's been more of a challenge, especially after COVID, to get some of these volunteer opportunities. So what I did when I was in high school is I volunteered at the UC Davis Mind Institute, and it was basically like kind of research / clinical, like kind of but also like working with autistic children, playing with them and teaching them and stuff. And like hospice volunteering is similar, or like other kind of like clinical like volunteering. They're usually more like kind of a little bit more grunt work, a little bit more like a little bit less hands-on clinical stuff. And then there are programs that are more formalized, that will get you in to like more clinical stuff. And the benefit of those is that because it's a formalized program, they can get you into the clinic even if many clinics are going to be like, oh, you're under a certain age. We don't really want to be liable for this, but as part of a program, it becomes a lot easier. And I think we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, so after extracurriculars, I know you did mention a little bit more about internships for undergrads, but what are some other summer programs as well that are available, potentially for high school students and also undergrad students to really attend to really extend their resume as well?
Yeah, so on the screen you'll see some examples of summer programs that are available to high school students. So I personally did one at Brown. It's called it was part of the Summer at Brown program, and it was called at that point, So You Want to Be a Doctor. And the whole gist of the program was basically there are lectures from med students and doctors about their experience in medical training, what their day-to-day life is, and then one of the things that I found was most valuable, and really what you should be looking for in these internships or summer programs, is the opportunity to really like actually shadow like a physician who's actively practicing, right? And so I shadowed a surgical oncologist and an anesthesiologist, and while I didn't end up going into any of those specialties, I thought it was really cool to be able to see, what actually goes on day to day in a clinic. Is this something that I could actually do? Turns out I don't really like the OR, but it was a great experience to see, what life is actually like, because unless you have family or family friends who are doctors, and even then, like, really, like, do people actually like tell you about the day-to-day stuff? Like, unless you have like direct relatives who are doctors, it's really hard to get an idea of like what a doctor does in day to day. What are kind of the struggles? What are kind of the things that you may see yourself doing, may not see yourself doing, right? So one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of relatively introverted people who are really interested in like medical science don't really understand what it means to talk to 20 new people a day, right? And be able to turn on that side of yourself that can get through that, and be amicable and have your patients actually like you, and that's like a skill that some people are like, oh, actually that's not something I'm interested in. I'd rather develop drugs for Genentech, and that's a good. I really encourage people before they apply, especially before they apply to medical school, but even as a high school student who wants to be pre-med, put yourself in that situation, really see what it's all about. The other thing that that you want to look for in these summer programs is the ability to do research, right? Getting a head start in research experience because of how much more competitive things have gotten. People are looking for undergrads to at least have their name on some kind of, presentation or research project. By the time they apply to medical school, having that experience as a high schooler, for the students that I've mentored and also for myself, having had that experience in high school really opens the doors for finding research in undergrad, because then the investigators, the professors who are running the research labs in undergrad are like, oh, cool, I don't have to train this person from scratch, right? One of the hard parts about like some of my students who didn't have any research before, one of the hardest things is getting a professor to actually reply to them when they're looking for research opportunities.
Awesome. So after we look at the guide for not only high school, but also we did talk a little bit more about undergrad students. We have room for an open discussion. We have 2 questions for that. So our first question is, how do you describe your life to be a technician? And then the second question is, as an experienced counselor, how do you help your students to find their passion, regardless if it's med school or not?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about work-life balance. As a resident doctor, I just want to put that in perspective. I'm not an attending. I'm not at that end goal. 30 to 40 years old. Kind of being my own boss, so to speak. But residency is hard. Med school is hard. It can be kind of life-consuming if you let it be. And ultimately, what I do day to day, I work in the hospital doing a lot of internal medicine, some dermatology, which is great. Using the science that I really have come to enjoy, using the knowledge that I've accumulated over who knows how many years at this point. I don't really want to put a number to it. And using that to treat people and help people feel better, be able to leave the hospital, maybe save a life here or there. Try our best. And it's ultimately really rewarding, which and I don't think I would really want to do anything else. And I think that's one of the things that kind of motivated me to kind of continue on with medicine, is that I find the fulfillment that I get from it more than some other things. I still do have time for hobbies. I have a fiance. So clearly that part of my life is going okay, I guess. And I have 2 cats and a dog, so we have fun. So it's not all just spending my entire life in the hospital, and I actually do have a life outside of it, which is I think really important to maintain if you do end up going down the medical path. It's so easy to get consumed by medicine. You're like, I want to do the best for my patients. I want to be there 100%, put all into it. That's great. But you also got to treat yourself, right? You can't let yourself become a patient. Well, if you need to, you can, but you don't want to put yourself in a place where you're sacrificing your own health, to do your job. And then as far as in my experience, I guess, yeah, as in my experience as a counselor, the things I like to do to help the students I work with find their passion really boils down to a couple things, and I kind of already talked a little bit about it, but really being honest and this, really encouraging students to self-reflect, because I know I didn't do that enough. And it's really hard, right? When you say you want to be a doctor, it's easy to say you want to be a doctor. It's really hard to put into words why, right? And what I really challenge my students is to really put together that why. And a lot of the things that we do in high school, a lot of things that we do in undergrad, to compete, to be at the top, to set ourselves up, we do a lot of that out of obligation because we have to, right? But within the things that we are doing out of obligation, what are the things that we enjoy the most? And what does that teach us about ourselves? I think that's something I like to go over with my students. And, you know, if they find that, I actually did have one student who came to me being like, I want to be pre-med. And through working with him, you know, it actually turns out he really enjoys the kind of the chemistry, the biochemistry, the prospect of, you know, developing medications and actually, you know, pharmaceuticals, and is actually more well suited than, you know, direct patient care, right? That's where they see that their passion lies and where they can make the biggest change in the world. And I want, you know, I like to help students find what that is. You know, everybody's different. You know, everybody's story is different. And so just got to really be introspective and honest with yourself.
Yeah, thank you for the discussion about those two questions. Now, before we do get into the Q&A session, we do want to introduce more about 70DU and what 70DU does. 70DU is committed to supporting students and parents every step of the way. So they offer a range of personalized services designed to meet the unique needs of each family. And the educational consulting team comprises of counselors who are alumni of top universities, providing tailored solutions to help students achieve their academic and career aspirations. So they also offer numerous amount of services from college application, essay brainstorming, and topic selection to admission interview preparation and decision-making support. So for more information or to schedule one free consultation, as 70DU was talking about, please contact our team at 70DU. And we also invite you to connect with us on WeChat for updates and additional services, including AP test preparation and comprehensive counseling as well. Additionally, make sure to scan the QR code here on the slides for more further details about 70DU. Now, yeah, we do have the 70DU handle in the chat, and please make sure to scan the QR code. And now let's go into our Q&A session. So if you haven't already, please submit your questions in the chat for Dr. Wei. We do see that we have a few in the Q&A, also a few in the chat. So we will make sure that we can answer as many as possible from Dr. Wei.
Yeah, so I see a question from Hannah Liu, basically stating that they need essay and application review. That is something that I do. Happy to reach out to the 70EDU team, let them know, and they'll get you set up. The next one is, does the undergrad major matter in medical school? Does any major have a particular advantage? The biology major is common amongst applications. Is that a disadvantage as a student can't stand out? Honestly, when I review like applications for medical school, I don't really think there's, you know, much advantage to one major over the other. There's definitely pros and cons. As you stated, the biology major is very common, so you kind of got to do something extra within that to stand out. And really, you should have some kind of, if you're going, you know, the biology route, you should have advanced level interests, right? That you kind of pursue during that. And if you have some kind of other, you know, major, I actually have a good friend who's a radiology resident at UCSF right now. He was a theater major, and so you know, but for him, what the challenge is, like, you know, how do I do that, which in it is like an entire thing by itself, and also do all the pre-med stuff, right? Because the nice thing about the bio major is that, you know, a lot of the pre-med stuff overlaps. You know, the disadvantage is that at that point, then you have to kind of go out of your way and do a little bit more on top of that, right? So it's pros, cons. It really depends on how you play it. There's no real. You should kind of choose what you're interested in, because that'll make you more interesting. If you avoid biology, even though you're like a great biologist, that's kind of a shame. So let's see what else. Let's see what's in the Q&A. When will students take the MCAT in general? So I mean, oftentimes people take it during their junior year if they're of undergrad. If they're planning on applying straight through, meaning not taking a gap year and applying to medical school throughout their senior year. That's kind of the classical timing, kind of like late late into their junior year, sometime in the spring usually. Yeah, so that's you know, kind of like the SAT during high school. How helpful is shadowing and volunteering at a hospital for high school students? It's a great experience if you're able to line that up as a high school student. That's, you know, it's great. Obviously, you don't want to just like, you know, kind of go through the motions and do it. You gotta have some kind of like story to tell once you're done doing it, right? Shadowing is great. I think everybody should do it if they want to do medicine. So I'm never going to say no to that. To be a doctor and a technician is different. Yeah, I don't really know. The kind of I think this is supposed to be part of a series. And you know, and the thought is, you know, a physician being, you know, somebody who uses you know, STEM as part of their career. The med student application essay, please reach out. You mentioned MCAT 511. What if it's 510? You know, we've got many applications here at 510. We've got, you know, many med students out there running around with an MCAT of 510. It's all just a benchmark. There's no like, there's very rarely hard cutoffs in the med school application process. If you have things, if you have, you know, it's obviously not going to be a selling point, right? But if you have other things going for you, you know, it may not hold you back as much as you think. Yeah. Any advice of how to look for research labs to join as an undergrad? How to look for good mentors beyond interesting research topics? Look them up on PubMed. That's PUBMED. Make sure that they're actually publishing stuff. One of the biggest traps as an undergrad is getting to a research lab that never publishes anything, because as great as it is to do, you know, really rigorous, really tough science that is thankless, and but you're really passionate about it, you also want to get some credit for your work, right? So it's usually better to find somebody who does publish, who publishes with undergrads as part of the team. The other thing that you want to avoid is people who do, you know, take all your work, you know, and are happy to have all your work, and then don't actually like credit you. Otherwise, kind of word of mouth, honestly, like you know, people have been going through this process forever. And yeah. Is a veterinary medicine application different from the regular medical program for the high school students? Yeah, I think it's the process is generally similar, but it is a completely separate thing. I have heard from vet med people that it can be more competitive than regular medicine, surprisingly. But as far as, I think it's also a post-grad degree, so it's like for a high school student, I don't think it's necessarily that different. Thoughts on taking gap years, pros and cons. How can we best utilize a gap year to boost our application? More clinical time. Also, gap years are so common. Like almost every one of my my cohort at Yale did a gap year before starting medical school. I deferred for a year, so that means I applied straight through and then decided to do some other stuff during that year. So it's actually a little bit that kind of the worst of both worlds. But the good thing about taking gap year is it gives you your senior year to be, you know, to be more prepared for the MCAT, to do more, you know, clinical hours and kind of do more research. But you really want to make sure you're doing those things and not just kind of cruising, right? Let's see. One of the things that people like to do sometimes, because you can make a little bit of money doing it, is scribing. I'm not a huge fan of Scribe America as a company, but if you can kind of spend, you know, a year with them, you know, doing some scribing, I think it's a really good way to get a lot of clinical experience. But they are not the best people to work for. Not sure what the rigors and perspectives like relatively easier. If we're talking about vet med, I don't know if it's easier or harder. Can't really say because I haven't done both. Let's see. Would it be viable to have a minor in music, or would classes be too conflicting? I have a friend from undergrad who was a very strong music biology double major, who went to Vanderbilt Medical School. So clearly doing fine. Yeah, it's possible. You just gotta be really good at managing your time. Can you go over how high schoolers can access working opportunities in labs that you usually couldn't? The age restrictions, liabilities. A lot of that ends up being through programs nowadays, or just like cold emailing people and seeing who will take you. If parents and stuff have connections with people, that's a great opportunity. If not, then the summer programs are probably your best bet for things like working in labs, because then they can kind of formalize the process. Cool. As far as the submitting of supplemental essays, how soon should the essays be turned in? Basically, as soon as you can get them done, within 2 weeks is great. I know that's tough. It depends. It really depends on. I think within the month for sure. Within 2 weeks if you can. A lot of the supplemental essays can be a little bit harder to turn around depending on how many essays there are, but yeah. The pre-ophthalmology undergrad student, are optometry students using the same characteristics and stats as med school admissions? I feel like they're a little bit less selective for optometry schools, but that's just kind of based off of hearsay. I don't really have much data. Broadly speaking, do you think top tier med schools prefer to see more research and more clinical experience? They admit both. They admit people who are very research heavy. I was probably a little bit more research heavy, but you gotta honestly, most people probably should have both. You can lean one or the other, but for the top tier med schools, like the people you're competing against will have done both, for sure. And then see, we have one more here. How hard is the MCAT like in comparison with the GRE or the GMAT? Is there a very early indicator if a high schooler will do well or not in the MCAT? Well, I don't know what the data is. I think it's different. It is longer than the GRE or the GMAT. Harder is a very subjective thing. It is quite rigorous. So it's probably harder than the GMAT, just based off of knowing people who have done the GMAT. GRE is pretty challenging in and of itself, but doesn't cover as much stuff, subject matter wise. And then as far as like predictors, I mean, a lot of the MCAT is just about how well you know the MCAT, just like any other test. Good test takers are obviously going to have an advantage on it. So if you do well in the SAT, typically you have the capability of doing pretty well in the MCAT, but they're very different tests. So it's not like a one-to-one kind of thing. All right, I think we've made it through all of them.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for answering all the questions, Dr. Wei. Now, if you do have any other questions that come up in the future, feel free to reach out to somebody you on WeChat, like we mentioned, and that also goes for any essay reviews that any of the students may want for applications. So yeah, thank you once again for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful day ahead.